Hi, welcome again. My name is Bernie Leshman. Thank you for joining me for another edition of Plumb Line, the TV show where we examine biblical truth, the plumb line of God against our own lives, and then we learn from the foundation, the instruction manual, the Bible. Because it's this word that God is going to hold this plumb line of truth to see if our lives have actually matched up to what He has written here. As we've been doing for the past 7 weeks, we've been going through the book of Ecclesiastes, and how then shall we live, and the meaning of life. And we're having a wonderful time, and we're not going through verse by verse. In some cases we are, doing as much as we can in our short time, but what we're doing is pinging on the themes, the main themes of the book of Ecclesiastes. Every chapter is a different theme that should lead us to wisdom and to a stronger knowledge of the Lord. And those themes should encourage us, therefore, to go into the book of Ecclesiastes in our own Bible, in our own time, in our own study, at home, in church, in small groups, so we could dig into it deeper, because it's in all the 66 books, Ecclesiastes condenses life in 12 chapters, and how we should seek life and seek after the Lord. And before we get there, for chapter 8 this week, let's go into a time of trivia here. Did you know? We look at some amusing facts and some things that you may not have known of. In fact, a lot of it I didn't know about until I researched it and read it myself. So, as we always do, did you know that homing pigeons use roads where possible to help them find their way home? Homing pigeons, home, home. In fact, some pigeons follow roads so closely that they actually fly around traffic circles before choosing the exit that leads them to their house. This is incredible. You see, God has given every creature, every human, we have intelligence guided by instinct and experience, and every animal and bird of the air and fish has that instinct that leads them where they should go, where they should find food, where they should do whatever. Did you know a snowflake can take up to an hour to fall from the cloud to the first surface of the earth? A snowflake can take up to 1 hour to fall from the cloud way up there to the ground. Did you know that only 5% of the ocean floor has been mapped in as much detail as the surface of Mars? Did you know that pain is measured in units of dollars, D-O-L-S? The instrument used to measure pain is called a dolorimeter. I can't pronounce this. The unpronounceable word. D-O-L-O-R-I-M-E-T-E-R, dolorimeter. Or meter, I don't know. Let's say English is not my strong suit. In a nod to astronauts, Texas is the only state that permits residents to cast absentee ballots from space. So if you have an astronaut who lived in Texas before he went up into space, when we had a space program, I don't think we have it anymore, because the government, we kind of went broke. U.S. government is completely broke. We're $16 trillion, $17 trillion in debt. And the space program started by Kennedy, or improved by Kennedy, back in the 1960s, and when man landed on the moon in 1969, and then we had all the space shuttles and the space station, and we had astronauts. Well, we still have astronauts going up there, but they go up on other people's Chinese and Russians and that kind of thing. Okay. Did you know that 11 top executives of the Direct Marketing Association, those guys who call you at dinner time and say, ask you to buy someone this and that product, or your credit card, you can get a better credit card interest, because, the telemarketers, they annoy you at supper time. They all belong to this thing called the Direct Marketing Association. And the 11 top executives of that have registered themselves on the do not call list. Now think about that hypocrisy for a second. These guys are running this association to bug you at supper times with their telemarketing calls, but they themselves put their own phone numbers on the don't call list. Interesting. Did you know that an iceberg the size of Long Island, New York, has broken off Antarctica and has blocked sea lanes used by both ships and penguins? Did you know in 2003 the Transport Security Administration dropped the requirement that air marshals pass a marksmanship test? Now think about that for a second. The reason why air marshals are on the planes in the first place, it was because of 9/11, when these Saudi Al-Qaeda people hijacked our planes and caused all this death and destruction in the Twin Towers and Pentagon and Shanksville, Pennsylvania. So President Bush put air marshals on airplanes. And you know how small an airplane is. The aisles are really small. If you're going to be a marshal and you want to take out a terrorist, you better be a good shot. So these geniuses in Washington, D.C. did away with the requirement that you pass a marksmanship test. Some applicants were even hired after they repeatedly shot flight attendants in mock hijacking episodes. Only in America, only in the government. Guys can't shoot straight. As of January 2004, the United States economy now borrows $1.5 billion, $1.5 trillion each day from foreign investors. And did you know, finally, that a Costa Rican worker who makes baseballs earns $2,750 a year? We have the baseballs made down in the Dominican Republic and Costa Rica, and these guys make $2,750 a year. And the average American pro baseball player makes $2.3 million hitting that ball or throwing around. Did you know? That's life, and Solomon addresses those kinds of inequities in the book of Ecclesiastes that we've seen so far, which is, in all these trivia facts that I read out there, they're all from life, they're all true, they all touch on different aspects of life. Well, they were written about in Ecclesiastes, and it teaches us how to live. So now we're up to chapter 8. Chapter 8 teaches us that the wise man, and remember the word for wisdom used all through the book of Ecclesiastes, Chakma, teaches us the wisdom that leads us to a reverence for God, wisdom, intelligence, judgment, how to look at things, how to strategize, that kind of thing. So, verse 1, chapter 8, who is like the wise man and who knows the interpretation of a matter? A man's wisdom illumines him and causes his stern face to beam. You ever seen now this wisdom, as I said, leads to a reverence to God. You ever seen a man who follows the Lord? His face shows it. One believer always knows another believer by the look, by the spirit that lives in both of us. And verse 2 says, verse 2, keep the command of the king because of the oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave him. Do not join in an evil matter, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since the word, verse 4, since the word of the king is authoritative, who will say to him, what are you doing? Who keeps a royal command experiences no trouble. For a wise heart knows the proper time and procedure. For there is a proper time and procedure for every delight, even when a man's trouble is heavy upon him. If no one knows what will happen, who can tell him when it will happen? Verse 8, no man has authority to restrain the wind, with the wind or the authority over the day of death. And there is no discharge in the time of war. Evil will not deliver those who practice it. All this I've seen and applied to my mind to every deed. There has been nothing done under the sun wherein a man has exercised authority over a man to his hurt. Now, all of this from verses 1 to 9 in chapter 8 is basically telling us that a wise man obeys the law, because the wise man first looks to God and obeys God. Therefore, he will translate that into the daily living by obeying the law. And we obey the law, traffic laws, or we should. We don't run red lights unless we're stuck in the middle of traffic and we got no choice but to proceed through it. We don't run stop signs because you're not just only going to get a ticket for running the stop sign, well, you're going to hit somebody else coming the other way, whose turn it was, or who has the right of way. We don't break the law by stealing, killing, going into places we shouldn't, just whatever. There's so many laws in the United States and in state houses and cities. You can't put out stuff in your yard that's against the code of that city. You can't park in the street in some towns in the night. You can't, if you're living in a gated community or in a subdivision, you have to abide by the covenant rules of that association for that subdivision. If you live in a condo, you can't do this, you can't do that. So there are rules to everything. And if you agree to them, you better obey them. And to make your life more orderly, it's better to obey the law. Otherwise, you're going to end up in trouble, legal and otherwise. And in the extreme circumstance, you're going to end up in prison. This is the entire reason, this is the entire purpose of the 10 Commandments, which we studied last year. This is why we studied it, because it is God's rule book for our own good. Not because God doesn't want us to have fun. He wants us to have the right kind of fun. He wants us to live right and follow and obey, because in final analysis, no matter what we think of the president, the governor, the mayor, or whoever, the state senator, he or she is representing God. Now, they don't act like it. That's not the point. The concept is, the theory is, the government of man is representative of the government of God. How that stewardship is executed and by whom is another story, and those people who occupy those offices are all accountable to God to a higher degree than we are. The president of the United States, the president of Mexico, the Prime Minister of Canada, who is a born-again believer from Western Canada. By the way, Western Canada is kind of like Texas, actually, and he is a real evangelical Christian. He speaks with moral clarity every time he speaks. Stephen Harper. These guys are the local state senator, even the local dog catcher. These guys are all local aldermen. These guys are all accountable to God, so we have to show respect for them. Okay. Let's move on here so we can enjoy our lives. So remember, endure the governments of men by submitting to them for God's sake. And for God's sake. And while we're doing that, always keep in mind that we're going to have wicked rulers. We're going to have people who are pro-abortion, people who are now pushing gay marriage, people who don't care what our kids read. People who are putting stuff in textbooks to public students that are anti-God, anti-family, and unnatural. People who are, you know what I'm talking about. You got people in government, people allowing marijuana legalization in Colorado, and there's all kinds of horrible things going on now there with smoke-ins and public demonstrations, people driving on highways totally out of it. Now, that is not, and that's sanctioned by the government because it was voted in and it's allowed. So submit to God for God's sake, and then realize that we're going to have not so good people in government, and expect to be confused when you see things going on done by the government, things that are hidden by the government, where we think common sense that you and I have will tell us not to have the certain economic policy, not to tax this too much, not to cut this over here, because we know what is going to happen, because common sense tells you you shouldn't tax too much, you shouldn't spend too much, you have to balance your books. But we see governments doing it. So we still have to understand that and submit to it. We can exercise our vote by going later in the election time and voting those kinds of people out. But we have to respect it and then pray that they don't get worse. And then even while all this bad stuff is going on and we're submitting to the law and all that stuff, we still have to enjoy our lives. And how do you enjoy your life? by enjoying God. Westminster Confession. The chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. And start enjoying Him right now, and it'll make your life a lot easier. Okay. Let's go on to chapter 8, verse 10. So then, I have seen the wicked buried, those who used to go in and out from the holy place, and they are soon forgotten in the city where they did this. This too is vanity. We've seen it from, you read some of these rulers in the Bible, they were pretty good about faking it. Jeremiah used to go in to King Zedekiah and warn him, prophesy against him. Jeremiah prophesied against this man for years and years. Zedekiah didn't obey him. In fact, they persecuted him. They beat him up. They threw him in a hole in the ground. They struck him up in the square on one of those stocks things where they put his arms and they locked it up in chains and had him exposed to the elements. Zedekiah was had pagan idols inside God's temple in Jerusalem, while pagan idols bowing down to Baal, while he's saying that he's a servant of God. And he had his own prophets and everything who were sent by God. And nowadays we see it. We see politicians going into churches on campaign, during election seasons, campaigning and talking about Sermon on the Mount. You ever notice they always talk about the Sermon on the Mount? They never talk about the Judgment Day part. Matthew 7. They're stuck in Matthew 6 and certain select passages to use to promote a certain social agenda called social justice and social gospel, which is now socialism and the gospel don't go together, but in their mind it does. So that's what he's talking about here in verse 10. They go in and out of the holy place. These kinds of people. So, and because that they don't see a reaction from God immediately, or even over a long period of time, or even over decades, even over a century, they keep doing it. But what they don't realize is these guys are storing up judgment for themselves, not knowing that they are more accountable than the average man they rule over for their stewardship in government. So leave those things to the Lord. Let's just drop down to verse number 14 here. I think we beat that one to death already. Verse 14. There is futility which is done on the earth. That is, there are righteous men to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked. On the other hand, there are evil men to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. I say, that too is futility. Verse 15, so I commended pleasure, for there is nothing good for a man under the sun except to eat and drink and be merry, and this will stand by him in his toils throughout the days of his life, which God has given him under the sun. This might sound like a confusing verse, but let's just say, in these last days, what we're witnessing here is up is down and down is up. I'm kind of paraphrasing verse 14 and 15. Up is down, down is up. We've seen righteous people being put upon by the wicked. We've seen certain people told that they have to do this and that, even though they're Christian and it goes against their system of beliefs. And we've seen the wicked insulting and blaspheming God and His people, persecuting the saints. More and more here in this country, but more importantly, we've seen it done in a physical way, and with Pastor Said and Iran and other places. But remember, we obey our rulers. We submit to authority and to government because we are the people who obey God. Now, verse 16. When I gave my heart to know wisdom and to see the task which has which has been done on earth, even though one should never sleep by day or night, and I saw every work of God, I concluded that man cannot discover the work which has been done under the sun. Now, if you read through the book of Ecclesiastes, he uses the phrase under the sun quite a bit. Because, there is nothing new under the sun. And he said that a few times. And under the sun, this has been done. Under the sun, that's been done. I mean, he's just using a word picture for under heaven. Or sort of like it is evident. Even though man should not seek laboriously, he will not discover. Though the wise man should say, I know, he cannot discover. So, expect the unexpected. Let's go back to this point here, but in the last days. We see in the last days, under the sun, and under the very eyes of God, and under the sad countenance of our Father in heaven, whose heart we are grieving, that evil is abounding in culture, in multimedia. You look at the History Channel recently. History Channel used to be about history, events in the past. Now they have all these weird programs about aliens. My son was watching a program the other day. He said, Dad, did you know that the earth was created by aliens? So after I had a good laugh, he explained to me that the History Channel is promoting this thing, that aliens created this and that. Of course, they have no scriptural reference or proof of it, but it keeps going on like that. And in the culture, we see the debasement of music. We see, let's say, multimedia. Twitter is one of, while we can use it for good, and I do, I use it to communicate with fellow saints and to post blogs and this TV show. We post the links to YouTube or we post when the show has been showed. And this show is aired on WLCF on Tuesday nights at 9:30 and on Saturday mornings at 5 a.m., Saturday and Sunday on WLCF TV 45, as well as Channel 4 in Springfield, which is public access, free, on Fridays. And prime time on Fridays at 8 p.m. So we see people losing their minds up in here, as the song goes, because the reality show is they're just going nuts. We have this thing on MTV called Teen Mom, which tells exactly what it is, Teen Mom, and instead of showing the difficulties and teaching about the morality and the future of someone like that, they seem to glorify it. So more and more young girls now who are having babies out of wedlock in their teens are trying to get on the show. Not just that, we have the Snooki and the other things with the Jersey Shore people, and then now the only good reality show out there actually is Duck Dynasty, which is one of the most viewed TV shows in America, because it's a family of down in Monroe, Louisiana, who have mastered the art of making duck calls by hand, and they made a lot of money off it, selling in Bass Pro and those kinds of shops, Gander Mountain. And their reality show is all about family, fun, hunting, and they got these massive long beards and live in a swamp. And that kind of reality show is actually the only one that stands out in a swamp of the other ones. So in the last days, what we have in verse 14 here in chapter 8, the futility, where we see the righteous put down by the wicked and the wicked exalted, and where up is down and down is up, we see evil abounding in the culture. But there's one or two things, and they stand out so much that they're most popular. So we see evil abounding in the culture. We see evil abounding in education, where curriculum has gone sideways. We see by the same governments we're supposed to respect here in verses 1 to 17 of chapter 8 of Ecclesiastes. Education, the curriculum is really horrible in public schools. Unless your district has good people on the school board who are monitoring what's been taught there, you better keep an eye on your curriculum, because everywhere else, especially in the bigger cities and the medium-sized cities, they're jamming indoctrination, anti-God, anti-Christ, anti-Christian material and perversity down our children's throats. Keep an eye on that, on education. And there's nothing more important to our kids right now than to keep monitor them in the culture and in their education. And unfortunately, some of this cultural rot gut and the education stuff has crept into the Christian circles. Some of these Christian colleges that we think, because we don't want to send our kids to public universities, some people send their kids to Christian colleges. I'm not going to call any names, but friends, be careful and research what they teach. Research especially now, start researching professors, because some of these professors getting in there are not Christians, and some Christian colleges are now starting to say you can believe in evolution and creation, oxymoron, and also the other kind of lifestyle issues. So be careful out there. Again, read chapter 8 of Ecclesiastes, submit to government, submit to the law, because it will go well with you all the days of your life. Thank you for joining me on this wonderful study of Ecclesiastes on Plumline. If you don't know Christ as your Savior, repent, put your trust in Him, and pray that He will set you free. God bless you. See you again next time. Thank you for joining me.